I may make some changes. If anybody has seen the Portsmouth talk that I did, I'm going to probably add a few additional things in. I'm conscious that I've got 45 minutes, and no doubt, Mike, you'll give me a time.
I will, Karen, I will.
When I get close to it. But one thing that Mike has pointed out is the fact that the number of claims and the size of them are increasing. The reason, I think, partly is because insurers are seen as easy targets. And that is one of the problems. And it's quite interesting, in the United States, certain professionals carry very low limits of insurance because the higher the limit, the higher the actual claims tend to be. And I don't know whether we're following the US philosophy, but we are certainly seeing some changes. It may be cyclic, but I suspect not. I suspect it's going to be ongoing. So I'm going to take a look today at more so what surveyors can do to prevent them having a loss. You can't stop somebody from litigating or seeking compensation, but you can try and do things to discourage them from starting it. So please feel free to ask questions. If not, do feel free to contact me later on if you have any questions. So I think there's a change in society. There seems to be very much a blame culture whereby people think that if something goes wrong, it has to be somebody's fault, and that they're seeking compensation. And this has been going on for years, but more so now against professionals. The other main problem is that a lot of people purchase vessels. They have enough money to purchase it, but they frequently don't have enough money to maintain it. And when they get a shock as to how much the cost of maintaining is, this is one of the problems. And then they tend to seek recourse against somebody, and it's normally the surveyor. That for some reason they don't think about the broker, but they do tend to think about the surveyor. So really it's about expectations of the client at the beginning. When you're undertaking a survey, it's making sure that they do understand that there are going to be maintenance costs, and those costs are not going to be necessarily cheap. You should look at using obviously good terms and conditions. I'm going to go through and discuss some points of writing a good report. There isn't obviously sufficient time to cover all of that in 45 minutes, but I've got some pointers that I think will be of use, and hopefully you'll find helpful and you can adapt. The other area where we tend to find a problem is where this is probably newer surveyors that have come into the profession, is that they possibly lack knowledge or expertise. And this is more a problem when a vessel, of which there are quite a number now, the manufacturers are no longer in existence. So that's something which I'm going to go into a little bit more detail. Your communication skills, it's very important that you communicate clearly to your client. I know it sounds obvious, but it's just making sure that they are aware, and that you are clearly communicating to them. Signing off of unseen work. Again, this is an area where we have had some incidents of claims where people have signed off work, believe it or not, without actually having seen the work. And this can be a problem, particularly then if the sign-off is used to raise finances. And modifying reports as well. We've seen circumstances where reports have been modified at the request of the client. And I always say that this should never be done. If you've written in your report something, then that is what you believe, and that's what should stay in the report. There are others as well which you might wish to discuss, and that's why I've left the question there. So what can you do to try to prevent claims? You cannot change society overnight, and I don't think it's going to change. In actual fact, I suspect it will just get worse. Again, mentioning about vessels people who buy vessels who do not have the finances to maintain them, perhaps you want to consider, as I've just said, discussing what the maintenance costs could be for that type of vessel. The expectations of clients. explain to your client that a second-hand vessel is not perfect. There are areas you cannot see and will not be able to see. And again, this really goes also with the previous point about for them to understand that there are going to be, perhaps for them, substantial maintenance costs. So I said the use of good terms and conditions. They help, but there are issues with consumers through Europe because of the Consumer Acts. And again, I can't go into detail about that because there isn't sufficient time, but it's always worth putting in your terms and conditions, even things that perhaps you cannot be applied against consumers, but it's also possibly going to actually put them off from pursuing a claim if it's a small potential loss. So I say, don't survey vessels that you lack knowledge or experience. That seems obvious, but sometimes one can be encouraged to do it by the client, or even the amount of money that's going to be paid for the survey. So writing a good report, I think this is more important than, in some respects, your terms and conditions, because it's the report that they rely on. And if they feel that they haven't understood the report's not clear, then that will be their cause of action if they have a loss. So the use of English is very important, that you consider how you're writing reports and phrasing it, and it's always worth making sure that somebody else reads it afterwards to see if they understand it as you think you've written it and put it across. Oops, points to consider come a bit indirectly. So it's the structure of the report is important. Make sure you place under headings and in rooms. I am aware that sometimes people, when they write their reports, may not include everything in that specific area. They may sectionalize it and put it somewhere else, and it may be difficult for the reader of the report to understand where they may find a specific piece of equipment or a specific problem. So do make sure the headings are quite clear. So identify where it's located and make sure it is clear where they may find the problem or not find the problem. The recommendations, I'm going to go and discuss this in further detail as I go through this presentation. One thing that has come to light recently with a claim is the fact that a heading of recommendations was used, and the argument is the fact that not everything was drawn out of the main part of the report. So I am very sceptical about using the heading recommendations, because if you actually miss something, it could be a problem for you in the future if something occurs and it's not under the recommendation section. So I would say tell a story in the content. If you write in such a way that it's easy for the reader to read it and to follow it, then it's easier for them to understand. So it is really a part of telling a story. I had a person recently that said that when they deal with experts, by the time they've finished, they don't change the content, they just make sure that the actual content reads like a novel. And in many respects now, because of the number of people who are now keen to seek compensation, particularly from surveyors, it is very important that it is clear to them that clear in the report the areas where they need to be concerned, and obviously that they may need to seek other experts' opinion on the cost of repairs, etc. Right, use of photographs. Lots of people do put photographs in their reports. I've sort of changed my view on this. I thought initially it would be a very good idea, but what has come to our attention is the fact that if you place a photograph in a report for pre-purchase survey, it may be that there's a part in that photograph that identifies something that you've not actually placed in the written report. So I think in view of what difficulties can arise from now placing them in pre-purchase reports, I would suggest probably that they're not put in unless there's a specific reason that you need to show them a photograph of it. But always make sure you keep all of your photographs safe, because that is going to be your contemporaneous evidence should you need to show that you've actually undertaken the checks and seen the areas in the vessel. With damage survey reports, it's different because obviously if you're working for an insurer or somebody else who wants a damage survey report, you would want to then identify what has been damaged due to whatever cause has caused the damage. So I think the use of photographs I would probably veer away from in pre-purchase surveys. And in terms of your summary, I'm going to go into more detail about that because of the recommendations section that I've mentioned. So always make sure you do draw your client's attention to aspects, as I've said. Always reread the report after a break from the report. It's so easy to actually read what you think should be there as opposed to what you've actually written. So that's why I always say at least have a good few hours break from it before you reread it, and preferably let somebody else also read the report. And so what to keep? Photographs, and keep notes of where you checked on the hull in particular. We have a lot of problems with hulls, particularly this issue with osmosis and the blistering. So do keep good photographs of the hull, and also keep notes of where you checked and how you checked, and also make sure that you do actually put down the method of checking as well. Make sure it's quite clear. So I'm going to go into some examples of areas that I think you will find of interest. These are issues that have been more recent in terms of the claims that we've come across. Unfortunately, as I said, it's too short a time to address all the issues, but I think these few will very much hopefully make you think about the words that you're using, both in your terms and conditions and in your report. One of the problem areas is the use of the word inaccessible, because there is case law that says that an area behind a hatch was accessible because it only required 2 screws to be removed. So what really needed to be added was that no screws would be removed to access areas, or perhaps tools used to access areas. So again, you should tell the story of what you did and why you didn't remove them. Perhaps it's because your terms and conditions, it's something which you don't do. So it is important that you actually do tell the story of what you did in each area and under each heading of the report. So again, I know I'm emphasising this again, but if you tell the story about what you did and why you didn't do it, it is very important. So, for example, what I've placed up here is, you may be unable to access X, Y, or Z because of whatever it is. It may be that screws needed to be removed. It may be that something was in the way and it was not able to be moved, but just make it quite clear as to why you didn't access an area. Or it may be because your terms and conditions, and therefore you would not be accessing that area because you will not be removing the screws, as I've said, or something else that's needed. And do be aware that if you do decide to change from what you actually state in your terms and conditions, what you will do, you should make it clear that it's only in this instance that you have perhaps undertaken removal of screws to check somewhere, and that it is not something which you're going to be doing through the whole of the vessel. You may want to advise them that they may need to consider taking separate advice or action, considering engaging an expert or a boat builder to further investigate areas where perhaps you could not access, or even where you did access. It may be that you spotted something and you feel that they need to get further expert advice. And again, for potential cost repairs, surveyors don't normally get involved in giving value of cost of repairs, because you really need to be, it's really a boatyard's job or somebody else's expertise, unless you feel you're confident that you actually will know what the cost of repairs will be. Then I would say veer away from actually putting a cost on it. And you may want to refer to previous problems you have found in these types of vessels. You don't have to go into detail, and always make sure you don't breach data protection. But you can always say from experience or information in the public domain, And it may be that it's in areas that have been accessed or not accessible. But you may wish to say that you've found cracking in previous vessels if you have done so. It's entirely up to you what you feel is appropriate in your report. So what I've put below really is for you to consider whether it's something which you would want to put in your reports and in your terms and conditions. I've written it as I would write myself, so it has my form of structure, and I do tend to use a lot of bullet points, but you may feel that you don't wish to use bullet points and you'd like to change it. And it also depends on what you have decided your scope of work is and what you will and intend to do when you undertake your survey. But what I've put down here is that no parts of the vessel are dismantled and no bolts are drawn or screws removed or tools. And again, as I said there, just check this is correct for you, because you may decide you want to use a tool to access somewhere. For parts of the vessel or the vessel structure or the vessel's appliances. And again, you'd want to change these depending on what you decide your scope of work is going to be. And as for vessel machinery, I've said here, if machinery is not inspected, then remove everywhere, because you might just want to put exclusion to say we do not inspect vessel machinery. But in terms of what I've put down here, I've assumed that you may look at the machinery. So you might have to say vessel machinery and in these terms and conditions and any report of communication, the above parts of a vessel, vessel structure, and vessel appliances or vessel machinery will be deemed inaccessible or not accessible. So you have to decide what you're actually doing. Are you going to comment on the exterior of the machinery? Are you not going to? If you're not going to, then just make sure it's quite clear in your report and your terms and conditions that you do not comment and provide advice on vessel machinery. And again, these are some other clauses that you may wish to consider including in your terms and conditions, and also to include in your report. And what I do say, and I think I mentioned this later on, is do make sure that when you write your report, if you want to state what you're not doing, that you copy exactly from your terms and conditions. If you modify the way you phrase something, for example, what you will do and what you won't do, it could be deemed that you're modifying your terms and conditions. So I always say, if you've written something, your terms and conditions, just copy and paste it and put it in your report as you've written it. So going to the first bullet point, what I've written here is parts of the vessel structure, vessel appliances or vessel machinery which are not visible at the time of the survey will not be inspected, including but not limited to those behind linings, beneath fixed doors or sole boards, and in these terms and conditions and any report of communication. I've put that there because if this is in your terms and conditions, then you want to make sure it's quite clear that it's applying to any report or communication, and that applies to any other terms and conditions. You may want to do a generality at the top and say that anything in these terms and conditions applies to report or any communication. So what I've gone on to say here is that the phrase not visible will be deemed to include such parts of the vessel's structures, appliances or machinery. And I say it's possibly part of a duplicate as above, but as long as there's no conflict between them, it's not a problem. So the one thing that has come to the attention is that a lot of insurers have insisted that people put in their reports and the words not visible or not accessible, but these in themselves have, they're not defined. You have to define them. So what we're doing here in these various bullet points is really defining what not visible is, and also defining what is not accessible. So again, going down to the next bullet point, we're unable to report or provide advice on inaccessible and not visible parts of a vessel, its structure, its appliances or its machinery, and hence we are unable to report that such inaccessible and not visible parts, structures and appliances or machinery are free from defects. And again, this is just expanding to make sure that it's quite clear that you know, what is considered inaccessible and not visible. Because theoretically, something isn't visible if a coat's over it, but that's not what the courts would consider not visible. Something could be, you know, as I said, just covered up. And going back to inaccessible, the fact that you have to undo a few screws, a court will not consider that's not accessible. So it's very important to state what you're not going to be doing. Going to engines and machinery, as I said, you might want to specifically exclude engines and other machinery and appliances, but here are, you know, I've said engines and machinery and appliances are not inspected, and where applicable, the client would be advised to instruct appropriate experts in their field to advise on the latter parts of the vessel. And again, it depends on what you've decided. Are you going to comment on the engines? Are you going to comment on certain machinery, or are you going to exclude certain machinery? And what appliances will you be commenting on? So it's very important that you do gives a form of definition for what you're actually going to be providing advice on. So as I've said, the reason for going through these use of these words inaccessible and invisible, etc., is because a lot of the insurers insist that you use these in your terms and conditions and perhaps in your reports, but unless you actually make sure there is some form of definition, as I've shown you, then those nebulous words can, you can find that they actually don't really restrict anything, and therefore you can be liable for areas that are perhaps behind what is I don't know, something where you need to use perhaps a tool to remove a screw or something. The courts will consider that you should have done because you hadn't excluded undertaking those checks in your terms and conditions and drawn it to their attention in the report. So what I've said here is important to you know, to repeat the above. Some people don't like repeating things in reports because they've been told by solicitors that it's not necessary. I feel it is necessary to repeat, to draw to the attention, because you're dealing with people who do not have knowledge necessarily of vessels, and they are relying on you. So if something is very important, then I do suggest you do repeat it or refer back to it. So I think it's quite important to do that, but always make sure you keep the words the same. So if you're going to requote, then make sure in the report that you're using the same phraseology. Or alternatively, an easier way is just to refer back to a paragraph and just say you'd like to draw to their attention again your comments in paragraph X, Y, and Z. And I've said here, if you use the word craft and not vessel, then again use craft throughout. Just keep continuity in both the terms and conditions and also when you're actually writing in your report. So one thing that I've actually alluded to already is possibly the problem with using recommendations. So I think this is possibly a bit legalistic, but you can modify it. But the one thing, if you do want to sort of draw attention to a few areas, is perhaps consider saying, without prejudice to the whole content of this report, we'd like to draw your attention to the following findings and comments. As I said, you may want to phrase it in a different way, more perhaps colloquially. But it is important that you don't just draw attention to some areas and others you don't then list, and you haven't actually advised your client that they should be reading the whole report. I know some people do not actually and will not actually put any form of summary or recommendation at the end, and that's also to a certain degree absolutely right, except if there is something very, very important and you may wish to go back and draw their attention to it. So in terms of what the courts look at, and I think this is quite important nowadays, unfortunately, even though you're not trained as what one would deem an expert for the court, I think it's important now that people start to write in such a way that they do actually construct their reports so that should a lawyer who may have to defend a surveyor can easily draw out the parts to defend to defend that surveyor. So I'm more in mind now to write or to recommend that people write reports with consideration for the fact that they may need to be read and dealt with by a lawyer who may be defending you. And in that way, really, you should be looking at the way experts that are used at courts write their reports. And there are courses that you can go on which draw to the attention certain aspects that are required by experts that go to court. And I think really it may be of interest to surveyors now to actually take a look at some of these training courses that are around, because they really do teach you how to structure your reports, unfortunately now in more of a defensive manner, to ensure that you do not get claims against yourselves. So probably just repeating myself, but by using that heading, you're not setting yourself up, unless you want to, categorising what is more important, i.e. main recommendations. So the courts always take the view that what does the man, I should probably say the woman as well, on the omnibus understand by the word main. If you're going to say these are the main points, and again with recommendation, it infers that they are the main points. So I would say it means to the man on the omnibus that the most important recommendations are those you're listing under the word main. And then, as I said, if you miss something off your list under the section, then you potentially have set yourself up for criticism. So I always say be very careful about summarising at the end of your reports, and particularly the phraseology that you use. So examples of recent claims, I'm just going to list these up. I'm going to go back, oops. Yes, areas that cannot be inspected. We've had incidents in particular where perhaps a locker was accessible by removal of a few screws or whatever. But then the other question was the individual, could they really get behind it and actually see inside it? And it has to be made quite clear that even if you do decide to access something and you do decide to use a tool, do make it clear as to whether you could properly inspect it or not, or whether the area was so tight that it was being possible to actually see absolutely everything that really needed to be checked or could be checked. So again, be absolutely clear when you're writing your report as to whether it is possible for you to actually inspect and report on it. Cover-ups. We've had a number of areas where, particularly more with metal vessels, with narrowboats, etc., where people have covered up, mainly on the hull. So it's quite important, if you're testing areas, to make sure it's clear to the client that you can't have tested absolutely every area. Even with hammer testing, you're not going to absolutely test every area of the vessel. And if something has got a substantial amount of paint on or whatever it is, just make sure it's quite clear to them that you possibly may not have identified an area that could have a problem because of the amount of paint or whatever else has been placed on the outside. So do make sure it's absolutely clear. Categorising and identifying issues. But this is quite interesting. There's, I understand that the new form of training is to put categories against severity or categorising in other ways. I think there's some mixed views on this. I think it's important that you have to make sure it's clear, even if you don't use a form of category, what is really important to be done from a safety point of view, obviously, and make it quite clear if something is obviously needs to be done immediately. Whether you use a form of categories is entirely up to you, but just make sure that there is consistency in the use of them, and make sure it's clear that the way you've defined it, that it's absolutely clear as to whether something is perhaps not so important and more cosmetic, as opposed to something which is seriously important and needs to be rectified before it goes out into the water. Post-report emails. Now, this is very interesting. I've seen quite a number of instances where surveyors have been very careful in the way they write their reports, but then when they carry on dealing with issues, which is still technically advice, they have not considered the structure of their emails. And that it may be important that the email modifies your report, but just make sure when you're actually writing, you are still giving advice, and it's important that you make sure that the way you write is in a very professional manner at all times, and also make sure that it doesn't vary your terms and conditions and doesn't modify parts of the report that you don't want modified. So it's very important. Post-report emails can be a major problem, and we've had a couple of instances where surveyors have been caught out and claims have arisen as a result of post-report emails. I said signing off unseen work. Never ever sign off unseen work, even if you're pressurised. I think the last claim came up at about €250,000 because of signing off unseen work. And it's often that they want the work signed off because they may want to raise finance, and then you can have a problem with the banks. So always make sure that you do not sign off unseen work. And again, just to iterate, modifying your reports, it's very important that you don't modify your reports unless you feel it's necessary, because it hasn't been clear what you're saying, or you may have come to your attention, perhaps, unfortunately, post-report something has cropped up and then you feel you have to modify it. But the general rule is don't modify a report, and don't be pressurised to modify your report by anybody who's purchasing or selling, or the brokers. So just really, I suppose, also to summarise and really to talk to anybody who'd like to talk about it, just make sure that your structure is good and clear. The content of the report, to make sure that, again, it's written in a way that can be understood by a lay person. And make sure you actually do set out very clearly the precise scope of your work, what you're going to do and what you're not going to do. Categorising findings, as I've said, it really is up to you how you actually decide to set up your structure, and whether you're going to actually have, 1 to 10 or 1 to 5, and how you want to define the categories, if you're going to use it for the purposes of pointing to your client aspects that are more serious than others. Use of photographs, as I've said, I would now probably refrain from actually using them in pre-purchase surveys. I would always make sure you take plenty to show what you've done, and also to show that the condition of particularly the hull or other areas. But I would do as many photographs as you can to show that you've looked at something, but don't necessarily disclose them in your report. And the actual issue of a summary, again, it depends on how you feel you need to draw out what you've found, but always be very careful if you use the heading recommendations, which I wouldn't suggest you should use, but always make sure that in the section you've decided, we'll call it a summary section, that they make sure it's clear that they should be reading all the other aspects of your report, because you're not going to be able to summarise sufficiently if you do wish to summarise every aspect that you've drawn to their attention. And as I've said, no doubt there will come a time when somebody will say, well, you didn't put that in the last page of your report under summary. So do make sure that you actually consider carefully how, if you do decide to summarise, you do so. And I'm happy to take questions if anybody would like to just ask me about other areas of the, I know we've got about 10 minutes to discuss. If anybody would like to actually go through anything else, I'd be happy to talk to them about what we've found over the last year or two in terms of claims. Mike, I don't know whether you have any questions, Mike, that you would like to ask that I may have missed.
I've got a question actually that's come up on chat from Paul DeRook, who many of us know. Hi, Paul. He says, hi, Karen. Why do you recommend not publishing the photos in or with the pre-purchase report?
Oh, hi. Yeah, the reason why is because after discussions, particularly with a number of quite experienced surveyors, I can see that there can be a problem. The reason why, I don't say don't do it if you need to for a specific purpose, but what can occur is that your comment, if you took a photograph of something, you may comment on something that you think you're focusing on, and you may have missed something at the back that somebody can say, for example, oh, why didn't you comment on that? That doesn't look too good. And I think quite right. We've never had a claim to do with a published photograph. But from talking, again, as I say, to experienced surveyors, their concerns, like if you put photographs in your pre-purchase surveys and you may be that you've missed something in the background or to the side that you've not commented on, that if you have a problem with something, it may be identified in the photograph, and then it can be used as a criticism to say, well, you don't cover everything in your report, you missed that. That's the reason why, and I think they're quite right thinking about it, that if you do put a lot of photographs in your reports, you've got to make sure that you do comment on everything within the photographs almost, because otherwise you could be criticised for missing something. And it's very easy in hindsight for somebody as a lawyer to turn around and say, well, that looks awful behind there, why didn't you comment on that? And now it's gone to the boatyard and that needs a few £100 spent on it. So that I have to agree with some of the experienced surveyors that I think it's not necessarily a good idea to include photographs in pre-purchase surveys.
I'm going to give you an example. So in the report writing course that we run, the online report writing course, I have one photo. Can't dig it up now and show you, but it's of a corroded tank. And the surveyor has created a very big red arrow to the top of the tank to indicate where the corrosion is, quite correctly. And it's absolutely fine. And he's commented on the corrosion and explained what the arrow is for. What he's failed to see is at the bottom of the image, there is a hole where a nut and a bolt once were, actually connecting that to the the base of the boat that has completely corroded, gone, vanished, whatever, and that caused a major problem.
Thank you, Mike. All right.
Yeah, follow your thoughts in it. Yeah, thank you.
I have a question as well from Chris Holmes online, who says, some boats have every locker full of clothes and ship stores. It will be said in the report. Is that okay?
Oh, yes. If you're having problems with, I assume he's referring to having an inability to see stuff. If there are, yeah, absolutely. Just write it and just say, we couldn't access because of too much stuff. And if you say, you might gain wanting your terms and conditions, you do not move stuff. I mean, it may be as simple as that. When you think, I always think it's a good idea if you ever get a chance to read a land surveyor's report. Now, the surveyors on land have been sued for so many years, particularly back, I think it was in the 80s and 90s, that they had to change totally how they write their reports now. And if you ever read their exclusions in their terms, and you can get hold of their terms and conditions, some of them will be no doubt be online, you'll notice they make it quite clear that they don't move stuff. They make it quite clear that they don't lift carpets, etc. And yes, Chris is absolutely right. If it's completely impossible to undertake a proper survey because of the amount of clutter in the vessel, then that needs to be said. I think he's absolutely right, and I don't think there's any reason why why any professional shouldn't put something like that in their report. Totally agree with Chris.
Karen, something that I heard last week that I found really quite disturbing, which explains that social behaviour is changing. I don't know who the surveyor is, and it doesn't matter. So unless they're online, I'm sure they won't put their hand up. But a surveyor went to look at the bow inside the accommodation. There was a big, heavy mattress in there. Don't know if you know about this case. I don't think it came from you.
No.
He didn't actually turn the mattress over. And what's come to light is that when the guy bought the boat, turned the mattress over, 4 of the, the mattress buttons were rusted. They were corroded. And he's put in a claim against the surveyor for £1,000. Oh, Ollie, it's you. Ollie's confessing all. Exciting, Ollie. Well, Ollie, join the conversation and please tell us more, because I find this really quite shocking and very alarming.
Yes, interesting. Can we see Ollie?
Are you there, Ollie? Hang on. Let's see if I can... where are you? Ollie, you're unmuted. We should be able to hear you if you speak.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Oh, hello, Ollie. Yes, that's very interesting. It's Karen here.
Hi, Karen.
Absolutely intrigued. So what was the chap's problem then? Tell me, I'm just amazed.
I mean, his issue essentially was that I didn't report on the fact that there was some light staining and a couple of rusty buttons on the underside of this mattress. His argument being that I must have lifted at least a portion of the mattress to access the forelocker in the forecabin, which is true that I did, but it was a very large double mattress in a reasonably sized boat, and so to actually completely invert the mattress and thus see that it was stained would have been, in my opinion, unreasonable and not really particularly practical for me to do on my own. I would risk possibly knocking off fittings or the like inside the cabin. Now, the chap is actually claiming against me, not necessarily because of the material defect, but in the sense that because I failed to report it to him, I compromised his ability to negotiate with the vendor, who was actually an agent as opposed, not an agent, sorry, he was a dealer. So it was a stock boat to the dealer as opposed to being a broker. So he argues that he would have had a good chance of getting the dealer to purchase a brand new mattress for him if I had reported it. Now, my opinion is it should be far beyond the scope of a standard pre-purchase survey to comment on some light staining and a couple of rusty buttons that frankly just substandard materials by the manufacturer, not suitable for the marine environment.
The boat isn't going to sink, Ollie, is it?
No.
No. Well, I can feel another term and conditions actually coming along, Mike. I think we're probably.
Absolutely.
I need to probably take a look at some of these land surveyors. Terms and conditions. Perhaps it's time now, Ollie. Now this has occurred, that perhaps surveyors put in their terms and conditions and draw in attention to the report that you'll not be commenting on, I don't know what you'll classify as cosmetic details on
Soft
curtains and soft furnishings.
Yeah.
I have actually now. I've written one. So I'm putting one in. And basically, it alludes to cosmetic defects. So, if a defect is found which may be considered only of cosmetic significance, but you can't see it in the normal operation of the boat, in other words, with the mattress made up, in this instance, you can't see that the underside has got a little bit of light staining on, presumably just from condensation buildup. So I put in to say that any very minor defects that may be discovered, and even if they are discovered during the survey, they will not thus be reported on herein. Because especially where they cannot actually be seen in the normal operation of the boat.
I'll have a little think over that, Ollie, because minor defects. I've got to have it. I'll have a little. It'll be interesting, Ollie. I think you've got my. If you'd like to send me what you've put in, I'll have a think about it, Ollie, because I think it's quite important. Because again, minor defects comes back to the same issue as accessible and inaccessible, and if you have a read of the recent report, there's an article I've written that's in there. Again, what to the man on the omnibus? What is minor? I don't know actually. I guess it's an awkward one. I'd like to take some time to think about that.
It is. It's pretty vexatious and irritating, but there you go.
Yes, yeah. Well, it doesn't surprise me, you see, because because his is it doesn't surprise me at all. So he feels that he should have been able to negotiate a brand new mattress, and now he wants you to buy him a brand new mattress of the same quality.
Well, my argument also is that, frankly, it's an 8-year-old boat. And if you actually go to mattress manufacturers who do it for domestic purposes, they would say that after 8 years, your mattress should be replaced in any case. But, am I really needing to go to the extent in my report where I need to sort of allude to such things? He's buying an 8-year-old boat. It's a used mattress. He's arguing also that there would be resultant bacterial growth inside of the mattress because it's become damp. And that's evident through the staining on the underside. Now, I don't want to go into the results of bacterial growth inside mattresses that have been slept on by human beings, but that's kind of beside the point.
Yeah.
So, Karen, just I'm going to talk later about report writing. I hope you guys will hang around. It's a non-technical report writing presentation later at 3:00. But where do you stop with all of this stuff? Are we now to assume that you have got to go further and further, and you really have got to nail down these words? Is society going to change back in a generation? No. So the path or direction of travel is one way here, but you don't want to have to caveat your report with so many pages that actually it's all a bit meaningless.
Yeah, I think you have to have a balance, Mike, between the caveats that you put in and actually writing a report that is going to give something to the client. The unfortunate thing, I think, though, is that there are going to have to be more caveats, and this is what Ollie's explaining is very important. That particularly with these little claims, because if you have a number of little claims against you, even if you're settling them yourself, there is a point when you have to actually advise when you go to get insurance. It often says, have you had any incidents? That isn't, the claim isn't just relating to the insurance paying out, and it's getting much more difficult now to get insurance. And I think, Mike, I told you that we actually had, of which we managed to persuade the underwriter, we had for the first time a client who had had for years, but unfortunately had a little spate of issues, and they hadn't actually all come to fruition, and actually some of them had gone away, but we had a problem with actually getting the insurer to quote. They wouldn't quote, and I had to, I put my neck on the line basically, Mike, and persuaded them to do so. So it is a problem. It's not just nowadays, Mike, it's not just, as we discussed before, it's not just you as a professional and what people think of you. The problem is now is if you have a number of series of incidents, even if they're small, you might find that insurers decide you're too much of a high risk. It's not the fact they've paid out now. It's the concern for them that you may be somebody who, for some reason, the way you work or the way you approach things, doesn't, encourages or whatever. They're going to use the word encourage, which is not quite right, but encourages people to think that they can claim against you. So, it becomes more of they're looking at more of the moral hazard now.
It does. So sticking with this, I'm just conscious of time now, but Ollie and his mattress problem here, at what point does the law of tort come into play, which of course talks about reasonableness?
Yes, I know. Oh gosh. If it went in front of a judge, it really would depend which judge you found, I think, as to whether he was being reasonable. It's very unfortunate, Ollie, and I think it's dreadful. I think it is dreadful. But in terms of what is reasonable, his expectations, did he expect to have a perfect mattress? Is it a usable mattress? Is it still
the top of it was pristine, because we actually stripped I actually went, I took my own time to go and see the boat again with him there. It was the first time I'd actually met him. As so often is the case, you don't actually meet your client many times. And he and I actually, fully inverted the mattress in the cabin. I could see, okay, there's a couple of rusty buttons and some very light staining. And I said, right, we'll turn it back over. Took two of us to do it, which was again a point of my defence, I suppose. It actually took two of us to safely do it inside the cabin, we turned it back over, stripped it, and the top of it was completely clean. So I guess there would be an argument to say, well, the top of the mattress is quite clean, so why would you not want to sleep on it? But
Yeah, and the other point, Ollie, is, I mean, can it just not be steam cleaned?
Well, exactly. I mean, I made a goodwill offer to him to say, listen, I found a local upholsterer. I said, look, I'll make you a goodwill offer just to placate you on this. I'm not going to pay £1,000 for a new mattress. No chance. That's just ridiculous. But I will pay a local upholsterer to replace the rusty buttons that you're complaining about. And I will also pay them to take off the underside of the mattress cover, which is stained as a result of these rusty buttons, and replace it with a more suitable material. And he rejected the offer. He said, no, I want a brand new mattress. And he maintained the point that it was got nothing. It became obvious that it wasn't about the material defect. It was about his loss of negotiating chance. And that's what he was really complaining to me about. And that's why he was taking that view.
Wow, Ollie, very harsh. Very harsh.
That's awful, Ollie. I mean, that just actually shows, that it is a problem. I would be interested, Ollie, if you wouldn't mind sending, because I have some other thoughts, particularly when you're talking about safety. Again, it could be, Mike, that you need to consider now whether they put in the terms and conditions, we will not undertake any actions that we deem to be unsafe.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well,
it could have been a risk to me for my, to my public liability. If I damaged the boat in trying to turn the mattress over,
yes,
knocked a light fitting off, torn a blind down off one of the port lights, any of these things which I could have done, trying to turn over a heavy mattress inside a cabin on my own, which is, a springy foam thing, which will bounce about. It's where do you start and stop? And should I really get to the point where I have to caveat every last thing out of the report? The list of caveats and limitations would be longer than the damn report would be, and it would become worthless.
Exactly.
Yes, I would say, though, I would say probably this soft furnishing issue is great, Ollie, and probably I think to cover yourself now thinking about it, just also something to do with, which I'll have a think about anyway. I'll talk to Mike later about it. I'm conscious we're running out of time, but probably to say that you won't do something which is, unsafe for you or the vessel. I'll have a think about it, but I think probably it's time that there are a few other small additionals. I don't think you have to write them in a lengthy fashion, but just to make sure it's quite clear that you're not going to be responsible for small stains on furnishings, soft furnishings, etc.
No, it's a boat. They're all damp anyway.
Yes. Yeah. Well, they're at sea, aren't they?
Ollie, can I thank you very much for holding your hand up at that appropriate moment? And
I'm actually quite keen that from my experience and things like that actually the industry can learn from it. There's no point in me holding it close to my chest and not saying anything. I would actually prefer other people to say, "Wow, actually, I need to think about what I need to do as well." If that's what's happening now.
The sands are ever shifting.
Yeah.
So thanks, Ollie. I'm going to mute you down now.
Okay, thank you.
Karen, can I say thank you very much indeed. Your sessions are always worth listening to, and we do value the content, and I'm sure there'll be many more speaking opportunities next year. I know you're always happy to take inquiries from people and so on, and yes, we will work together. The other thing I'd like to just point you to is Karen does run a pretty regular column in the Report magazine dealing with a lot of weird and wonderful things, and it's absolutely worth your while spending a few minutes just to pick those up.
Thank you very much, Mike. Thank you. Now I've just got to work out how to turn this off.
Well, I will mute you down now, and then I think you just end the meeting. And Paul Madeley says, thank you, Karen, interesting. So I'm going to seamlessly move from you to Paul, who's the next to speak. Thanks very much, Karen.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye.